Good morning, good evening, everyone. Today on this channel we will fight against the adverse character of our world around us, and we will consider one situation. What can one do if the physical force in the micro scale, let's say, so individual person, on the macro scale, so let's say state, so society, tribe, military force is weak, but the peril around us, peril to our safety, threat to our safety, is huge, and our physical force or military force is weak. Then, in such a situation, one needs to think. And the great example how the state that was freshly recovered its capital, and it was actually re-established by Michael VIII Palaiologos, the founder of the last dynasty of Byzantine emperors, who recaptured Constantinople in 1261 from the hands of Western Europeans called Latins. And he had his state weakened with troubles. It was all the time endangered because on the east there was a rising power of Turkish states that were having an appetite for Byzantine possessions, and at the same time Western powers like France, Italian city-states that didn't want to allow Italian trade to be Byzantine trade to be rebuilt, and they didn't want to have competitors in the eastern part of the Mediterranean Sea for their trading routes. They were not friends of Byzantine Empire either, of the freshly rebuilt Byzantine Empire either, I should say. So they were dreaming about recapturing the Constantinople and kicking out the Palaiologos dynasty from their capital. So the situation was not so good for Byzantines, so they had to start to think. And they used then, to save themselves from the Latins, they used the most powerful weapon they had those days. I mean, diplomacy. And thanks to diplomacy, many intrigues, many bribes, many combinations, they used Sicilian people who were not satisfied because of the rule of the French-speaking elite who was those days ruling the Sicily. And in 1282 AD, when the French expedition was being prepared, expedition to recapture Constantinople by Charles d'Anjou, the Sicilian rebellion started, and many French people were killed and kicked out of the Sicily. And the great dream of Charles d'Anjou of recapturing the Constantinople and rebuilding the Latin Empire and getting a lot of profits out of it actually didn't materialize. Luckily for Palaiologos and Byzantines. Actually, Byzantines, we know that the name Byzantine was proposed in 16th century by German scholar Hieronymus Wolff, and it actually applies to Eastern Roman Empire that survived the Western Roman Empire, and with time the Eastern Roman Empire became the Greek-speaking nation. And that's why by Latins, Western Europeans, they were called Greeks, but their Muslim opponents always they were calling them, as they should, Romans, in Greek Romanoi. So Byzantines were always regarding themselves as Romans. I would say Eastern Romans, and this is more appropriate and appropriate with respect to historical reality, let's say. And the great book that describes to us very well this plot of the political and diplomatic intrigue that stopped the expedition, that it was really the real peril to Constantinople and its further existence. The great book that describes us this incredible diplomatic operation that was undertaken by Byzantine, so Eastern Roman Greek-speaking diplomats, is described by a great book by Stephen Runciman, the famous British medieval historian, Byzantinist, and the scholar of the Crusades. And the title of this book is Sicilian Vespers, because during the Sicilian Vespers, French elite of the Sicily was killed by angry Sicilians. And Stephen Runciman is known for his great 3-volume history published in the early 50s of the 20th century of crusades to the Palestine, and his view of crusade is not so sympathetic, is not so, I would say, positive, because I would say it's hard to expect from Byzantinists to have positive view of crusades, especially that Byzantine Empire, actually, yeah, Emperor Alexius of Byzantium asked Western European nation to come with help to to fight against Turkish Muslim invaders, but later the interests of Byzantines and Crusaders went into different ways, were not so convergent, and at the end of the day, in 1204, the so-called Fourth Crusade, because of many intrigues of Venetians who wanted to have their costs of transporting the knights from Italian coast to the east paid back, Crusaders, thanks to some intrigue in 1204, sacked Constantinople and destroyed Byzantine Empire, caused its decomposition into several states, including Latin Empire that was ruled by Western Europeans and reconquered, as I mentioned, 57 years later in 1261 by Michael VIII Palaeologus. Michael VIII Palaeologus, this is the same emperor who actually wisely kicked out Charles d'Anjou with his diplomats and didn't allow Westerners to recapture the Constantinople. And this is the great achievement. As I told you, if you don't have enough force, if you don't have enough resources to fight, you need to think. And Greeks did it perfectly, and it's nicely written in the book called Sicilian Vespers by Stephen Runciman. Very great school of diplomacy and politics, and also beautifully written medieval history of 13th century Mediterranean. And not only, this book also includes nice description of the history of medieval Sicily. Take care and have a nice read. Bye.